Cheyenne now passed the first few houses and came to the main path. It was not very broad but very steep and rough. Inside the houses you could see chroma candles, and the chroma lanterns on the way partly lit up the darkness. Some of them were burned out though. The undercity couldn't afford to buy new ones. The chroma lamps in the street lanterns glowed through fragments of chroma stars, which fell from the sky from time to time. But that was such a rare event that researchers took the challenge and invented artificial chroma fragments. And opposite to the real ones, the artificial ones stopped glowing after a while and had to be renewed. Lately, their selling price has been rising drastically, but no one in the undercity knew why. Artificial chroma fragments used to be very cheap on the market since they were of great need. Many people couldn't see well at night, especially not when they lived in a city where there are glowing lights everywhere, and they got used to it. Cheyenne didn't have a hard time seeing in the dark though. Even in the darkest night she could see very far. Her grandparents kept on saying that must be a miracle, since they couldn't even see their own hands in front of their eyes at night, let alone see colors in pitch blackness. But logically, Cheyenne couldn't see colors at dark as well, since there would be no chroma shine. But she could see silhouettes and different stages of black in the darkness of the night. Finally, she arrived at the alley which led to her yard. Falconheart jumped the stairs, and that meant that from now on there would be even ground, so no more steep and stony road. Cheyenne's grandparents shared the yard with their neighbor Rosie, an old widow with a good heart. Ever since her husband was killed by the Knights, she lived alone in her big house and had a good relationship with Cheyenne's grandmother. When those two were together, even the old Rosie could laugh, and she is a lot happier when they spend time together. But now she sat by her window on the first floor of her house, and she stared with empty eyes at the girl which was riding into the yard with her horse. Oh my, what happened to her? I haven't seen her so sad in a long time now. And around this time she's usually with my grandmother. How very strange. She jumped off the saddle and tethered the reins of her horse's bridle around the post in front of the barn. One more time she looked up to Rosie, whose rigid gaze resolved. Then she slowly turned her head until she looked at Cheyenne directly in the eyes. She had definitely cried and seemed very disturbed and desperate. But why? The old woman rose proudly from her seat and closed the curtains. What was that? As if she'd seen a ghost. Why did she stare at me like that? And why did she close the curtains all of a sudden? Such strange behavior. That's not the Rosie I know. The girl got a very bad feeling and her heartbeat grew faster. All of a sudden she felt the need to see and hug her grandparents, to know that they are safe. Cheyenne left the stallion in the yard, even though she should have brought him into the barn first to cover him from the rain that was soon to come. But she didn't think of that at that time. She ran to the front door and saw that it wasn't closed, but a little opened. She stood still and noticed some red spots on the door handle. The girl got goosebumps and figured out that it was blood. What? Cheyenne couldn't form a complete sentence. She breathed heavily and fast and started shaking. Her heart felt heavy and seemed to shatter into pieces every moment now. She had to know what happened here, but at the same time she was very scared of it. She wanted to step into the house, but she couldn't. Presentiment was in the air. Adokas came to her side and poked her hand gently, but determining. The girl put aside her fear. This was probably just her imagination, and there was surely going to be a logical explanation for this. Her grandmother would explain everything to her in a second, and made her a hot cocoa to calm her down. Everything's all right. No need to panic. I'm just imagining things. Maybe this is not blood, but... Cheyenne took a deep breather and stumbled a few steps closer to the door. With a loud squeak, the door cut the silence and gave sight into the inner parts of the house. Cheyenne's eyes widened as she saw how much blood there was on the floor. She just stood there, heavily and noisily breathing. "Grandmother? Grandfather?" She cried out for them, but no sound came out of her mouth. Her breathing became faster and irregular. She forgot everything around her, and she didn't know what to do anymore. "Where are you?" Her voice was broken and sounded desperate. There came no answer to her question. She couldn't feel anything anymore, not the cold of the night, not even how exhausted she was by now. "Grandmother? Grandfather? Where are you? Grandmother!" Her cries sounded shrill and hysterical. She lost her balance and fell against the door. Her eyes filled with tears, which ran across her cheeks as she closed her eyes. Sobbing, she stood against the front door and asked herself the same question over and over again. What should I do now? Never before she felt this empty and disturbed. Her heart was aching so much that she would just like to scream out in pain. Her legs didn't seem to be able to carry her weight any longer, and she was ready to break down on her knees at any moment. Inside the house it was dark, pitch black. Arukas sat next to Cheyenne. He seemed to want to protect her. From time to time he touched her gently with his nose and tried to comfort her, but the girl just sat there at the entrance door, crying and numb of soul pain. Outside, rain started to fall. Falconheart whinnied as the cold water hit his back. The fairy wolf started shaking. So did Cheyenne, but she wasn't shaking because of the cold. She was right before a mental breakdown, but she would never admit to that, and she tried to be strong. Slowly she got her thoughts back under control and tried to figure out what had happened. Okay, what happened here? A robbery? Housebreaking? Where are they? Why? If only I had been here earlier. If they are dead, then where are their bodies? Are they even dead? Who killed or took them? Maybe there is another explanation for the blood. Will I ever find out? What am I gonna do now? I have to find them. I just have to know what happened. Maybe they need me to save them. Maybe someone saw something. But who? Wait a second. Maybe Rosie saw something. Maybe that's why she was so weird. I have to ask her. Cheyenne slowly got up and almost collapsed again in doing so. She hadn't felt this weak in a long time now. She tried to keep on standing upright and hoped to gain back her balance. Finally she made it, and could stand without leaning against the door again. Suddenly, light hoofbeats sounded from the yard. That's not Falconheart, but a lighter horse. But who? She turned around and hoped that her assumption was correct. The girl went into the yard. The wind had grown stronger and the ice-cold raindrops hit her face. It hurt a little. In front of her, there was a horse, not as big as Falconheart and obviously more delicate and nervous. From the mane and fur of the horse, Cheyenne could tell that it was the mare of her best friend Xaver. Now she could make him out clearly. He jumped off his horse and came up to her. Cheyenne, are you okay? Cheyenne ran towards him and hugged him before he could say more. She started crying desperately in his arms. Xaver! She could only whisper. The friend didn't say nothing and just hugged her back. He always exactly knew how to handle Cheyenne, so she would feel better. His blonde short hair was drenched, also was his clothing, but that didn't matter to Cheyenne at the moment. She was already wet from the rain now as well. But she didn't care. She had other issues to attend to. She was so happy that he was here now, that he came. How did he know she would need him? Maybe he saw something too. Xaver was 18 years old, and ever since they could think, they had been friends. Those two had always done everything together, and their friendship was indestructible. They could trust each other blindly and always rely on each other. To Cheyenne, Xaver was like a big brother. She tried to pull herself together and told him what had happened, how she overslept and hurried home, and what she found by the time she had arrived. And now I don't know where they are, and if they are even still alive. She saw in the green eyes of her childhood friend that he was now worried as well. Best is probably if we ask Rosie. Come on, that's what we'll do now. Then we'll know for sure. Cheyenne, before we're not certain about what happened here, we should just hope that it's a big misunderstanding and that the two of them are fine. Cheyenne admired the calmness of her friend. He stayed calm most of the time, especially in situations like these, and always knew exactly what to do. She thought herself very lucky that he was here. Xaver stared at her for a while, as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out of his mouth. Arukas whined a little and drew the attention of the two friends on him. He stood in front of Rosie's door already and scratched it. Some raindrops fell from his wet fur, and he had to blink all the time so the raindrops didn't get into his eyes. His sensors hung down, and the ends of them laid on the stoned ground. Xaver and Cheyenne stepped closer to the wooden door, but before they could knock, the old lady already opened up. I heard the dog scratching at the door. The old woman confused the fairy wolf with a dog all the time ever since she knew him, even though Cheyenne kept on explaining how that was not the case. Are you here because of... She had to pause and gulped. Her voice sounded old and withered, smoky, shrill and desperate, and it shook. The widow collected herself again and began to tell what had happened without waiting for Cheyenne and Xaver to ask her first. Your grandparents are gone. The knights... Again she gulped. The knights came here in the afternoon and collected taxes. Since your grandparents didn't have a good day at the market, there was no money left. These damn villains searched your entire house, but they found nothing valuable in their eyes. Then they took them with them. They said they're now sentenced to pay their debts on the human ranch. They took your grandparents. Cheyenne, I must deeply apologize. I couldn't do anything. But there was a moment when the knight's attention was distracted while searching the house, and in that moment your grandmother gave me this. She said that in case something would happen to her, I should give you this scroll, and you have to promise to take good care of it. With that being said, she ended her report and gave Cheyenne a small, slightly yellowed scroll. Without opening it, the girl thanked Rosie and said goodbye. She turned around and started running towards her horse. Xaver thanked and said goodbye as well, then hurried after his friend. "Wait, where are you going?" Cheyenne already sat on the drenched stallion. "Well, if they are at the human ranch, then they might be still alive. I will not give up on them as long as there is hope left that they might be still alive. I may be able to save them. It was my fault that they were indebted, and I could never pay taxes. They should not suffer for my misdemeanors." A thunder sounded loud and Falcon Heart reared. In the shine of the chroma lamp, Xaver could see how determined she was, and nobody could have stopped her from her plan. He always wanted to be as brave as his friend. "It's not your fault that you can't earn money, and it's not your fault either that they had to take care of you. And it's also not your fault that the harvest was so bad. Oh, please, just be reasonable for once and stay here. This is suicide." But Cheyenne didn't listen to his words, and while he was still trying to stop her, she chased off the yard with her horse. Arukas followed. Oh, sometimes she's so unreasonable. In the midst of the night, without any preparation, riding towards a certain death, just to help someone. Typical Cheyenne. But I won't let you go alone. Otherwise you won't stand a chance at all. At least someone must be smart here. Damn, why is everything always so complicated? Oh, come on, Shiva, let's hurry after them. Rosie was left behind, standing at her door. "Be careful, Cheyenne. You are so important to us all. Be on your guard, our last hope."